Alright, so I've been using the Padsmith Temple of Dreams for a bit now, and honestly, this is one of those pads where you kind of get what it wants to be almost immediately. It's very obviously a control pad, not just the generic marketing way where every brand says, yeah, it's balanced or it's good for control, but actually in the way it starts moving, in the way it carries glide, and especially in the way it lets you stop. Padsmith itself describes it as a control cloth pad with a proprietary mesh fabric surface, slim edge stitching, and open cell PU base, and the focus on both high static and high dynamic friction, which pretty much tells you from the start what kind of experience this pad is going for. And I think that's really the right place to begin, because with the Temple of Dreams, the main conversation is friction. More than speed, more than softness, more than whether it feels premium the second you touch it, the real story of the pad is how it handles movement. If you're not super into mousepad terminology, static friction is basically the resistance you feel when you first start moving the mouse from a complete stop, and dynamic friction is the resistance you feel once the mouse is already moving across the surface. So, in practical terms, static friction affects those tiny initial movements like micro corrections and little adjustments. And dynamic friction affects how the actual glide feels once you've committed to the swipe. That difference matters a lot because two pads can both be cool control pads and still feel completely different. You can have a pad that starts easily but slows you down once you're in the motion. You can have a pad that resists the start a lot but then opens up once the mouse gets going. And then you can have a pad like this where both parts of the movement feel intentionally controlled. That's kind of the whole identity of the Temple of Dreams. It has that feeling where the mouse doesn't just take off for free. There is a bit of resistance when you first start the motion, and then once you're moving, the pad still keeps you grounded. It doesn't suddenly become super open, and it doesn't give you that slippery, almost disconnected kind of glide. It stays measured, it stays pretty stable, and honestly, if you like pads that make your aim feel more intentional, that's probably the first thing you're going to notice here. To me, this is the kind of control pad that makes the most sense for people who actually want the surface to shape the movement a little bit. Not in the sense that it fixes your mechanics or makes you aim well automatically, obviously, but in the sense that it gives your motion more structure. It makes the start of the movement feel more deliberate and it gives you more confidence at the end of the movement too. That's why I think it makes a lot of sense for Tac FPS players in particular. If you spend most of your time in games where holding angles, micro adjusting onto heads, and stopping cleanly on a target matters more than just freely gliding around, then this kind of friction profile can be really nice. It gives the crosshair a more anchored feeling and it can make your aim look a little bit calmer overall. And honestly, that's probably the appeal of the Temple of Dreams more than anything else. It's not trying to impress you with speed. It's not trying to be some super broad, works with everyone kind of surface. It feels like it has a point of view. It feels like it knows exactly what it wants to do. And what it wants to do is keep your movement controlled from start to finish. That lines up pretty well with how the pet has to be described too. Early impressions and reviews have consistently placed Temple of Dreams on the slower, more control oriented side, with one impression calling it much slower control pad and another review saying it has more static and dynamic friction than something like the Saturn Pro. At the same time, though, I don't think it comes across like some weird novelty pad that only works in one hyper specific scenario. One review of the Temple of Dreams still described the friction as relatively high overall, but said it was comfortable enough across not just tech shooters, but games like Apex, Overwatch, and Warzone as well. So I don't really look at it as a one trick surface. I just think it has a very clear preference toward controlled motion. A lot of pads try so hard to be neutral that they end up not being that memorable. The Temple of Dreams actually feels like it has a real identity, and whether you end up loving it or not probably depends mostly on whether that identity matches the way you want your aim to feel. One thing I do want to mention though, because I think it matters, is the bass. And this is one of those areas where to me it doesn't really feel like a direct artisan style experience. The base is stable enough in normal use, but is not as sticky as a classic Artisan Poron base. So, if you're used to that super lockdown, almost suction-like desk grip that some Artisan pads give you, this doesn't really hit that same level. It's not bad, and it's not like the pad is sliding around everywhere or anything dramatic like that. But yeah, it's not the same ultra sticky feeling. I think that's worth saying clearly because sometimes when people hear premium control pad, they automatically expect every part of the experience to map directly onto Artisan. Here, I don't think that's really the right expectation. Surface identity makes sense for someone who likes high control pads, but the base feel is definitely on its own thing. The other thing that stands out to me is the firmness. To me, it feels pretty close to an Artisan mid-type firmness. So you're not really getting that softer, more compressible feeling where the mouse sinks in a bit more if you press down. It feels firmer, flatter, and more direct than that. And honestly, I think that works really well for this pad. Because if the whole point of the Temple of Dreams is consistency, then having a firmer overall feel makes sense. You don't get as much variation from pressure. The surface interaction stays more even. The glide feels more predictable, and that usually helps if you want your stopping behavior and your general movement to feel repeatable instead of changing depending on how hard you're pressing into the pad. If you are someone who likes a very easy start to glide, very low resistance, and a more open feeling once the mouse gets moving, then I don't think this is really going to be your thing. The Temple of Dreams is not trying to disappear under the mouse. You do feel the surface, you do feel the friction, and the control is a very active part of the experience. But if you are the kind of player who wants the mousepad to calm your movement down a little bit, then I think it gets a lot more interesting. If you sometimes overswing, if your aim gets a little bit shaky near the end of a flick, or if you just generally prefer a more grounded and stable feeling under the mouse, then a pad like this can make a lot of sense. Because higher static friction in a good implementation can help keep the crosshair from feeling loose or twitchy when you're setting up small corrections. And higher dynamic friction can help keep the movement under control once you're already in the motion, instead of letting the swipe get away from you. Padsmith explicitly markets the pad around having both high static and high dynamic friction, and that matches the broader impression of it as a slower, more deliberate control surface. This is the mousepad for people who want their mouse movement to feel structured. It's for the people who like strong stopping confidence. It's for people who prefer a firmer surface feel. And it's for people who don't mind the pad's friction profile being something that actually notice every time they play. That's really the Temple of Dreams. Not flashy in the way a speed pad is flashy, not impressive because it's trying to do something gimmicky, just very committed to giving you a planted, control, consistent experience from start to finish.